I'm a police detective, or at least I was. Because after this all comes to light, I doubt I'll be able to keep my job. I've decided that I'm going to reveal everything about the investigation into the death of Isabel Collins. And I'm going to post the interrogation transcripts associated with the case. These interrogations were carried out during our investigation into the murder of Isabel Collins. However, during our investigation, we discovered something evil. After this discovery was made, the U.S. government stepped in and immediately shut down the investigation. They covered up any trace of what we had discovered. Why they chose to do this, I do not know. Maybe to prevent panic. Maybe this is all somehow their fault. I don't know. Everyone who was involved in the investigation signed non-disclosure agreements, including myself. I am now breaking that agreement in order to warn the world about this. I know I'll lose my job, and I know I'll probably get silenced, maybe even killed, but I can't just sit by and do nothing. This mess started when Isabel Collins, a college student from upstate, had arrived in our little town for a vacation. She was reported missing when she didn't return from that vacation. Sometime later, her body was found in the swamp. Detective Harry O'Neill and I were put in charge of solving her murder. We decided to begin with the person who first discovered her body. Here's the transcript of his interrogation. Interviewer: Detective Harry O'Neill, lead investigator. Interviewed: Martin Doyle. 5 days after arrest. Date of interview: 1/17/22. Ho, please state your name for the record. MD, Martin Doyle. What's all this about, anyway? You already caught me. Ho. My name is Detective Harry O'Neill. My colleagues and I simply want to know what you found in the swamp on the night of January 12th. MD. I don't want to talk about it. Ho, why not? MD. I fucking don't. Alright, I already told the cops. I didn't have nothing to do with whatever happened to that lady. Ho, Mr. Doyle. Nobody is suggesting that you had anything to do with what happened to Isabel Collins. We simply want to hear your account of the night. MD. Fine, I had just completed a job. It was this real nice place. And I had gotten a pretty good score from it too. You know, cash, jewelry. The stuff you'd come to expect from a house like that. But there was one thing I hadn't accounted for. The house had a damn silent alarm. And by the time I was done, the cops had arrived at the place. Ho, so. You ran, MD? Yes, I ran. I ran like hell. I jumped over the backyard fence and ended up cutting through the swamp. It was there that I found her. Ho, are you all right, Mr. Doyle? MD, yeah. It's just, Jesus Christ. Ho, you found Isabel Collins. MD, yeah. I hopped over a log and nearly stepped on her. She was dead. And, bloated, waterlogged, I guess. Her face was Jesus, her poor face she had. Maggots in her eyes. Her legs were missing. She had what looked like bite marks all over her, too. Maybe an animal or something. I threw up after I saw her. Then I screamed. I think that was what that brought you cops to me. Oh, did you see anyone else out there? MD, no. I didn't. Ho, did you see anything that? MD, look man, can I just go back to my cell? I don't want to talk about this crap. Ho, please, just cooperate. We only want to help. MD, no. Fuck this, I didn't see anything else. Alright, just the dead lady. Ho, you're certain you didn't see anyone else? MD, yeah. Can I go back to my cell? After Doyle's interrogation, we investigated the area where Isabel Collins's body was discovered. I still remember how hot it was that day. Too hot for January. Mosquitoes kept swarming me like flies. The only good thing about the heat was that it had dried most of the mud. So we at least had solid ground to stand on. Her body had already been taken to the coroner. And the spot where her body had been still stained with a deep, dark red color, almost black, even though the body had been taken away days ago. The smell still covered the area like a thick cloud. It smelled like maggots and rotten swamp. She had human bite marks on her. Right, Harry had asked me, before taking out a cigarette. He always did have a bit of a smoking habit. Yeah, they were all over her body. I responded. We knew it was a murder only because of the human bite marks found on various areas of her body in the autopsy. The thought of that unsettled me. What kind of person would do something like that? Was it supposed to be some kind of calling card? Or maybe they just got some sort of cannibalistic satisfaction from it. Whatever it was. It made me sick. Brushing that thought away, I looked over at Harry. He had that look in his eye. The one he got whenever a case intrigued him. He'd been working as a detective for much longer than me. And I almost saw him as a teacher. So, Harry, what do you think? I had asked him. I think we're dealing with a real freak, but not a smart one. If they're dumb enough to leave bite marks on somebody, They'd probably leave other clues too, he said. I mumbled an agreement to him and turned my attention back to the crime scene. My eyes wandered the small patch of solid ground we were currently standing on. First, I saw nothing, only dried mud, logs, and leaves. Then, something caught my eye, a glimmer of bright, man-made color in the brown mud. I walked over to it, eyes transfixed. It was when I crouched next to it realized it was a small card. I picked it up, a smeared, mud-covered driver's license. I used my thumb to rub off some of the dirt. The name on the card read Rupert Baker. The picture showed an older, bald man with a stern expression. Found something? Harry asked, putting out his cigarette. I looked up at him. I believe so. Interviewer. Detective Harry O'Neill, lead investigator. Interviewed, Martha Baker, wife of Rupert Baker. Date of interview, 1/2022. Ho. State your name for the record. MB, Martha Baker. Ho, Mrs. Baker. When was the last time you saw your husband? MB. Oh, nearly 2 weeks ago now. I filed a missing persons report. Is this what this is all about? Oh, yes. We found his driver's license a couple days ago at the scene of a murder. MB. What? Oh my God. Is Rupert okay? Oh, as far as we know, yes. Do you have any idea where we would be able to find him? We've already checked his place of work, and he wasn't there. MB. I told you, he's been missing for some time now. I don't know where he could be. Oh, are you certain? Please, Mrs. Baker. Anything would help. Mrs. Baker sighs. Oh, we only want to ask your husband a few questions. That's all. MB. He's probably somewhere in the swamp. He always loved it out there. He fished there often. Sometimes, he'd talk about the people out there. Oh, are there any fishing spots he preferred? Mrs. Baker is silent. Oh, Mrs. Baker. MB. My husband has been missing for 2 goddamned weeks. And you people only care after some city girl winds up dead. You know what? Fuck you. Get out of my goddamned house. Oh, Mrs. Baker. Please, MB, no. Fuck you. You couldn't give a rat's ass about my husband. Get out. We took what little advice we got from Mrs. Baker and began combing the swamp. It was hard work. Not only were we searching for a possible murderer, but the swamp itself seemed to want us dead. Swarms upon swarms of mosquitoes, snapping turtles threatening to take a foot off if you weren't careful, heatstroke, and of course the caimans that lived in the area. During the search, we didn't really find anything of note. Until one night, I still remember it. It was me, Harry, and a third officer, a rookie by the name of Walter Clay. We're boating through a particularly dense section of swamp. The main search party had split up to cover more ground, which meant that we were essentially alone. I remember that the moss-covered water was so thick we were basically boating through mud. The 3 of us were quiet mostly. It wasn't that there wasn't much to talk about. It was just that the swamp seemed to drown everything else out. It felt almost disrespectful to make simple small talk. I remember how on edge I felt that night. I didn't know why I felt that way. It wasn't the first time the search party had split up like this. And it wasn't the first time we had gone this deep into the swamp. I guess in my gut I just knew that something was up that night. I looked over to Clay. He was the one steering, so he was focused on making sure we didn't slam into any of the many dark, vine-covered trees that littered the swamp like mines in a minefield. I didn't know the rookie well, but he seemed like a good kid. Harry was at the front, aiming a flashlight into the darkness. It didn't seem to help much, only piercing about 15 feet into the swamp in a tight beam of dim yellow light, but we supposed it was better than no light at all. I checked my watch, 3:28 a.m. I sighed in frustration. How the hell could we find anything in this pitch darkness? Let alone a person? Excuse me, ma'am, Clay suddenly asked, shattering the slow silence of the swamp. Snapped out of my thoughts. I turned to answer him. Yes, Officer Clay, I answered, my frustration dripping into my voice a little. You said that this guy, what was his name? Ugh, rookies. Rupert Baker, I said, resisting the urge to facepalm. Yeah, Rupert Baker. Do you think he, he asked, wiping the swamp's dampness off his face. What? I asked the rookie. Do you think he killed that Collins girl? Clay asked. I thought about his question for a moment. It was possible, sure. And his driver's license was at the scene of the crime, but why would he do it? Why would he throw away his life just to kill some lady he's never even met? I believe so. Harry suddenly piped up. You do, but there's no real motive, I said, turning to face Harry. After I said that, Harry sighed and took out another cigarette. Some people don't need a reason for all the horrible shit they do. Some people are just nuts, he said, lighting the cigarette. Harry's statement shut both Clay and I up. He was right, I suppose. But it didn't exactly lighten the mood. I was about to reply when a light up ahead caught my eye. There's a house up ahead, Harry said, his head fixed toward the light. A house, all the way out here. We were deep in the swamp, and there wasn't supposed to be any property out here. See for yourself, he said, and as the boat got closer I did. There was a house there. In the swamp, it was clearly an old house. A log cabin on stilts, which pushed it a foot or so above the water. The roof was slanted, and the house was covered in moss and vines. The porch at the front of the house led down onto a small wooden platform where one could dock a small boat. What do we do? Clay asked, a slight panic in his eyes. Call it in. There shouldn't be any property out here, and the suspect could be hiding in there, Harry said. And Clay obliged, talking almost frantically into the radio. There didn't appear to be a door to the house. Just an empty doorframe that the beam of Harry's flashlight couldn't seem to pierce. There's someone in there, I said out loud the moment I realized it. There was a large figure standing deeper in the house, standing within view of the doorframe, almost as soon as I called them out. They then staggered out of the house and into the light. They looked horrible, completely soaked, streaked with mud and dirt, with pale, almost leathery-looking skin and sickly, bloodshot eyes. It was hard to recognize him through all the dirt and grime. But it was the man we were looking for, Rupert Baker. He put your hands up. Now, Clay called out to the filthy man, who only grunted back at us in response, lifting one of his hands to try and protect his eyes from the beam. His hand looked somehow even worse than the rest of him. The tips of his fingers were caked in dried blood, and his fingernails looked unnaturally long and thick. Shut that damn light off, boy, Rupert said. His voice sounded gravelly and feverish. I pulled my own sidearm on him. I wasn't taking any chances with the prime suspect. Mr. Baker, you're being placed under arrest, I said firmly. We found him. Over. I could hear Harry talking on the radio. Go away. You need to go away, Rupert spat out, his eye twitching. He coughed, a deep, hacking cough. He stumbled down the stairs. Put your hands up and turn around, I said, keeping my gun trained on him. Instead of following my order, however, Rupert's bloodshot eyes suddenly darted down to the dark water. He twitched, almost hypnotized, before shooting his hand down into the water. A second later, he pulled out a wriggling trout from the water. Harry and Clay looked just as surprised as I was. His blackened nails were digging into the poor fish, and blood dripped from his hand. Before any of us could react, he lifted the trout to his mouth, his chapped lips peeling back, revealing yellow and brown teeth. He bit into the trout, and an awful squelching noise filled the air. He then began tearing chunks out of the fish, hungrily licking his now bloodied lips like a dog, and eventually, what was left of the fish stopped struggling. I watched, trying not to gag, as he forced the rest of the fish down his throat. I order you to put your hands up, Clay said, his voice shaking. Rupert barked a hoarse laugh. It's not enough. It's never enough. I need more, he said, stepping into the dark water. Come here. I'm still hungry, he muttered, wading towards us, each step making a sloshing sound. Rupert was a fairly large man. He stood at 61 and weighed over 280 pounds. He could easily capsize us if he tried. He took another sloshing step towards us. Freeze, asshole, I said, raising my gun. I hoped it would scare him into surrendering. It didn't. He gave me a yellow smile. Or maybe he was just baring his teeth. There were bits of fish skin stuck in his teeth. He took another step towards us. You're out of your league, Rupert Baker said, twitching. Was he on something? Meth wasn't all that uncommon around here, but something seemed off. Mr. Baker, we just want to talk about what happened to Isabel. Isabel Collins, Harry said, attempting to de-escalate the situation. It backfired. Isabel, he said simply, before falling silent. Then he started to cry. I didn't want to, he sobbed, looking around like a confused child. I had to, he shouted, before charging at us, snarling like a rabid dog. I fired 2, maybe 3 shots, but he didn't go down. It was as if he hadn't even been scratched. He waded over, snatching me out of the boat and plunging me into the cold swamp water. This part is a bit harder to remember. All I remember is the black, wet muck, the muffled shouts of my coworkers, and the feeling of his hands around my throat. But there is one thing I can remember. Hell, I can remember it more clearly than most things in my life. I remember seeing something in the water with me. I saw faces, dozens of them. They were horrible, scaly faces, with big, giddy grins full of vile teeth and filth. I tried to scream, but I couldn't, and swamp water filled my lungs. But then he let me go. I burst out of the water, gasping for breath. I watched as Rupert Baker fell back, several bleeding red holes in his chest. He fell into the water, making a large splash. He didn't resurface, but the cloud of dark red that surrounded him let me know he wasn't getting back up. Jesus Christ, he just Clay sputtered, his face as pale as a sheet. Next to him, Harry was pointing a gun at the downed man, almost waiting for him to get up. There are people. There's people in the water, I sputtered, frantically, climbing back into the boat. What? Harry asked, his voice concerned. There are people in the water, I said, pointing at the murky water. It was around then when backup finally arrived, and we were soon brought back to solid land. Interviewer, Patrick Thorne, Chief of Police, interviewed Detective Rebecca Coleman, 1 week after the incident. Date of interview, 1/28/22. PT, state your name for the record. RC, Officer Rebecca Coleman, PT. Now, Rebecca, I don't often do these myself, but I feel that the Collins case is a special one. Rebecca, the case is closed. You are aware of this, so tell me, why do I keep hearing that you are spreading rumors about it? RC, I'm not spreading rumors, I'm just telling people what I saw. PT, if you really did see something, don't you think that the other officers at the scene would have seen it as well? RC, well, the people I saw were underwater. PT, they were underwater, without any way to breathe. RC, look, point is, there's more to this than just Rupert Baker. PT, Baker's in custody. RC, Baker survived. How? PT, against all odds, he managed to pull through. RC, Jesus. PT, how long were you underwater? RC, what? PT, Officer Clay mentioned that you were underwater for more than a minute. Is it possible you could have hallucinated the faces? RC, I didn't look, I know what I saw, all right. PT, look, I know that you think you saw something out there, but the public has been on my ass about this case. They need answers. They need to know what happened to that poor woman. And what happened is that Rupert killed her. I'm closing this case. Rupert's arrested. Justice served. End of story. RC, this is bullshit, and you know it. After my interrogation with Chief Thorne, I was told to take a couple days off, because I was apparently traumatized from my encounter with Rupert, and I apparently needed to take a break from work. Part of me wondered if I really had just imagined those faces. But I know what I saw. Because of that, I decided to do some investigating off the books. I can't explain how much I regret this. I wish that I just took my couple days off and dropped the case, but I didn't, and I ended up starting with the man who nearly killed me. After his arrest, Rupert Baker was quickly tried and transported to the nearest prison, a lovely place about 3 hours from my town. The entire drive, I wondered if I was making the right choice talking to this guy. For all I knew, he didn't know anything at all, and this was a big waste of time. But I couldn't think like that. He was the best lead I had about the faces. When I got there, I soon found myself sitting in a chair, facing a window with a telephone in my hand. I started to regret my decision when the guards brought him in. The first thing I noticed were his eyes. They were twitching, scanning me and everything else in the room. In the light, they looked more yellow, and his pupils were almost slits. His skin looked almost rubbery, and his face covered with strange sores that almost reminded me of scales. His torso was swathed in filthy brown bandages. He picked up the phone with a gnarled hand. What happened to you? I asked. I was taken aback. Lots, he said, and his voice sounded like sandpaper. What you want with me, little lady? I cut straight to the point. The faces in the water. Who are they? He let out a laugh. What a horrible sound. I really wish that I ate you when I had the chance. I could have done it. I could have eaten you like I did the other lady. I didn't want to then, but I can't stand it no more, he muttered, looking down at his twitching leg. Can't stand what? I asked, and he suddenly looked back up at me with intense desperation. I'm so fucking hungry, little lady. I'm so fucking hungry, he repeated. I took a shaky breath and asked him again. Who are the faces in the swamp? This time he seemed to realize that I asked him a question. I thought I told you was out of your league. They are my brothers and sisters. They made me this. They told me to spread the gospel, he said, before letting out a deep, horrible cough. They made you like this. Spread the gospel? What are you talking about? I was starting to think that I really was wasting my time. After I found that house saw the heart, they made me. I didn't wanna, but they made me. They forced me to eat her so I'd become one with the swamp. His voice trailed off as he rambled. They made you eat her? I asked. I knew that if what he was saying was true, there really was much more to this. They told me to. I was tricked. They made me, he shouted, suddenly shooting up and attacking the glass. I jumped back out of my seat in surprise. He lifted his head back and smashed his head into the window in an attempt to reach me. Then he did it again. And again. He had shattered his nose and had given himself a severe concussion before the guards managed to pull him away. He kicked and screamed on his way out. I thought a lot about what had happened on the drive back. I knew that parts of it could be chalked up to a crazy cannibal's ramblings. But other things were much more worrying. The people in the swamp made him kill Collins. What the hell was going on here? My head was swimming with theories by the time I made it back home. And it was only then I realized how much the trip had exhausted me. I lasted maybe an hour before I fell asleep. I remember that night. I had a lot of dreams, strange dreams, about the swamp. I was back in the swamp, but everything was strange and warped. The trees had eyes. And with every waiting step it felt like something was going to grab me and take a leg. Or a hand, or a head. I didn't really know where I was going, but I knew I was going somewhere important. Then I saw it. The house. The same one we found Rupert at. I felt my stomach churn the moment I looked at it. I knew I had to go in, but I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. The house filled me with dread and deep, primal panic, but my legs carried me forward anyway. Everything felt like it was in slow motion, but eventually I reached the house's dock. I lifted myself from the water, feeling the eyes on my back, and made my way up the stairs. Then, there it was, the Inkai black doorframe. I could feel something inside pulling me towards it. Then I woke up. The following day, I marched my way straight to Chief Thorne's office. When I entered, he was typing away on his computer. "I paid a visit to Rupert Baker yesterday," I said, and he immediately looked up in surprise. "You what?" he asked, shutting his laptop and standing. "There are other people in the swamp. They are seemingly accomplices in the murder, and we need to go back out there." I hoped that being blunt would help my case. It didn't. "Officer Coleman, I told you, the case is closed," he said, his voice stern. But I started. "Get out of my office," he said, voice getting louder. "God damn it. You know there's more to this. You just don't want to deal with the paperwork, you lazy bastard," I snapped, thoroughly done with Thorne's antics. "Get the hell out now," he shouted, and I stormed out. After I went back to my desk, I knew that I wouldn't get any help from the department after that. Why was nobody listening to me? Why did nobody care? Eventually, my mind drifted back to the house and the dream. I couldn't shake it from my mind. "Hey, you all right?" I snapped out of my thoughts and saw Harry. "I can't believe they closed the case. There's clearly so much more here that he's just letting get swept under the rug," I said, and Harry sighed. "It isn't right," he said, before taking out a cigarette. "Did you hear what happened to Rupert Baker this morning?" He lit the cigarette. "What happened?" I felt like I already knew. "He killed his cellmate and had partially eaten him before the guards found him. They ended up killing him after he attacked the guards." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm going tonight. To the swamp. I need answers." I said that, but I knew it was more than just that. I needed to get to that house. My mind was drawn to it. I had to go there. After I said that, Harry just silently walked away. Later that night, I arrived at the swamp, got in a boat. Right before I began my journey, I heard two people approaching. I looked up to see Harry and Clay. Their faces were solemn. Harry spoke first. "We believe you," he said, and I didn't say anything in return. We had a mutual understanding. We were all going to that house. After a moment, they got in, and we left the dry land in a boat. The ride to the house was silent. The swamp didn't want us to speak, so we didn't. We never got lost, because the swamp didn't let us get lost. After a while, we started to hear them. The people in the swamp. They screamed and groaned like banshees. I think that Clay began to cry. That journey was a truly surreal experience. It felt as though nothing was real, as if we were in a shared dream, but we weren't. Eventually, we were able to see them. They came in all shapes and sizes. I saw a woman with no mouth and alligator mouths for hands, and a clawed man with a face covered in moss and the tail of a gator sticking out of his sternum. Harry began to mutter something, but I couldn't make it out. Then we finally made it. The house stood there like an ancient temple. More of them were standing in the waters around it. I would call them people, but that's not what they were. They were all smiling, those that had mouths. Anyway, I was so transfixed by the doorway to the house, I barely noticed when my friends were dragged screaming from the boat and into the dark waters. I remember that my legs carried me out of the boat and up the steps of the house. I walked past a man with the head of a snapping turtle protruding from his neck. He opened his mouth and black, filthy water poured out. Then I was there, at the doorway. I stepped inside. It was there that I found it. It lay on a tree stump in the center of the room. A pulsing, oozing, black mass of rotten slime and muck. The heart of the swamp. It had called me here. To it, I felt its malevolent presence. I felt its hissing, oozing breath, which poured out of several orifices on its skin, and only then did I realize that I had been tricked. We all were. Then the heart showed me something. I saw images in my head. Things I can't describe. Feelings I can't describe. I screamed as I felt my very soul start to melt away. I fell to my knees as swamp water poured out of my eyes and my nose and my mouth. Nothing mattered. I was in the deepest and darkest place I had ever experienced. Groveling before this thing, it certainly wasn't the god of anything. And it only existed because it could. The water that poured from my mouth turned to vomit. And then a dark, black blood. It felt like I was being slowly and carefully turned inside out. It was like I was being mentally flayed alive. I thought I would never leave that place. I was about to pass out when it finally spoke. Spread my gospel. The voice echoed and burrowed into my head. It sounded like 1,000 people talking at once, but simultaneously like nothing at all. Then it all stopped, and everything was fine. After a long, long time, I got up and left that swamp. Nothing tried to stop me. I never saw Harry or Clay again. It wasn't long after that the men in suits arrived. They said they were FBI. They asked everyone lots of questions about the Collins case and made everyone sign non-disclosure agreements about it. I don't know who they were, or if they even were FBI, but I don't care. I'm going to tell people about that case. I need to spread the gospel.